A powerful young CEO sat alone in her wheelchair, hiding her loneliness behind success, until a curious little girl asked a question that would change everything. If you love emotional stories about life, love, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more. Lara Fisher tapped her fingers lightly on the armrest of her wheelchair, trying to hide the restlessness that had been growing inside her. The flight was delayed again, and the waiting area felt colder with every passing minute. At 28, she was already a CEO, running a company worth millions, admired and respected in every boardroom she entered. But none of that stopped the silence from echoing around her. She glanced at her phone for what felt like the 100th time. No new messages, no missed calls, just her own reflection staring back at her. For all her victories, she had no one waiting, no one to share them with. Then a small voice cut through the hum of the terminal. "Daddy, why is that lady all by herself?" Lara blinked and looked up. A little girl with bouncing curls and wide green eyes was tugging on her father's sleeve. The man, tall with tired but kind eyes, instantly flushed with embarrassment. "Emma, sweetheart, don't dash." But before he could finish, Lara surprised herself by speaking. "It's okay," she said, her voice softer than it had been in months. The girl stepped closer, bold in the way only a 5-year-old could be. "Hi, I'm Emma. Why are you sitting here alone?" For a second, Lara felt something crack inside her chest. People usually avoided questions like that, circling politely around her wheelchair, around her life. But this child went straight to the heart of it. "I'm Lara," she replied with a small smile. "I'm just waiting for my flight, like you." The man crouched to his daughter's level, whispering something Lara couldn't hear, then looked up with an apologetic smile. "I'm Adrian Meyer," he said, extending his hand. "Sorry about my daughter. She's curious about everything." Lara shook his calloused hand and noticed the tan line where a ring used to be. Emma, ignoring the grown-up's awkwardness, climbed onto the seat next to Lara's wheelchair as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Are you rich?" she asked suddenly. Adrian's face turned red. "Emma." But Lara actually laughed a laugh she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. "I guess I am. Does that bother you?" Emma thought about it seriously. "No. But why don't you have any friends here?" Rich people in movies always have lots of friends. The blunt honesty of that question hit Lara harder than she expected. She had been so busy building an empire, proving herself, climbing higher and higher, that she'd forgotten to build a life that felt full. Sometimes, Lara admitted quietly, when you work too hard, you forget to make time for friends. Adrian sat down across from them, watching his daughter with that careful balance of protective but not smothering. "So, what do you do for work?" he asked, curious now. "I run a tech company. We make software for hospitals," Lara explained. She studied him for a moment. "What about you?" "Construction," he said. "At least, I was hoping to start fresh again soon." The intercom crackled, announcing another hour-long delay. Emma groaned dramatically, throwing her head back. "This is taking forever." Adrian pulled her small backpack closer. "We'll read another story while we wait, okay?" And as he pulled out a worn children's book, Lara realized she was about to spend the next hour doing something she hadn't done in years, sharing time with people who wanted nothing from her, except her company. Adrian opened the book, his deep, steady voice filling the quiet waiting area. It was the kind of voice that made even strangers lean in, gentle and strong at the same time. Emma snuggled closer to him, but kept her eyes on Lara, as if making sure she was listening too. "Once upon a time, there was a princess who didn't wait for anyone to save her," Adrian began. Emma grinned proudly. "That's my favorite part. She saves herself." Lara couldn't help but smile. For years, she had heard stories about herself in the media, powerful, determined, untouchable, but never once had anyone told her a story where she simply belonged. She leaned back and listened, surprised at how comforting it felt just to sit there with them. "Why did the princess live in a tower?" Emma interrupted halfway through. Adrian chuckled. "Because that's where princesses lived in those days." Emma frowned. "That's silly. If I were a princess, I'd live wherever I wanted." Then, without hesitation, she turned to Lara. "Where do you live?" Lara hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "On the top floor of a very tall building." Emma's eyes widened. "That's like a tower." Are you a princess? Lara laughed, shaking her head. No, I'm not. Emma shrugged. You could be. You're pretty enough, and you live in a tower. Adrian cleared his throat, clearly embarrassed, but Lara wasn't offended. For the first time in a long time, she felt warmth spreading in her chest at the thought. What makes someone a princess, do you think? Lara asked. Emma thought about it seriously, like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Being kind to people, she said finally. Helping others, and not being mean just because you can. Adrian looked at Lara then, his eyes meeting hers across the empty row of seats. She felt her breath catch. That definition struck her harder than she wanted to admit. She had been ruthless in business for years, convincing herself it was the only way to survive. But here was a 5-year-old child reminding her of something she had forgotten, that kindness mattered more than crowns, more than towers, more than money. Emma's face grew softer as she added, My mommy used to say that everyone can be a princess if they try hard enough. The air shifted. Adrian's smile faltered just slightly. His jaw tensed in a way that revealed more than words ever could. Lara's voice softened instinctively. Where is your mommy now, Emma? The little girl's voice dropped to a whisper. She's in heaven. Daddy says she watches over us. Lara's throat tightened, her eyes flicking to Adrian, who gave a small nod, confirming the weight behind his daughter's words. I'm so sorry, Lara said gently. Emma gave a tiny shrug. It's okay. Daddy says we have to be brave for her. That's why we're moving. We're going to start fresh with Grandma. The announcement echoed again, reminding them their flight was still delayed. Emma groaned and laid her head against her father's shoulder, her small body curling into him with absolute trust. Lara watched quietly, struck by the tenderness of it. When had anyone last leaned on her like that? When had she last been someone's safe place? Adrian brushed his daughter's hair back gently and met Lara's eyes. What about you? He asked in a low voice. Are you traveling alone? Lara nodded slowly. Always, she admitted. Emma's eyelids fluttered, fighting sleep, and then she whispered as if it were the simplest thing in the world. You can sit with us on the plane if you want. Her tiny hand reached out to pat Lara's, and before she even realized it, Lara felt tears stinging her eyes. The first-class cabin was nearly empty when Lara rolled down the narrow aisle. She had boarded early, as always, her assistant having arranged the details so she wouldn't have to struggle in the crowd. Settling into her seat, she pulled out her tablet to review tomorrow's presentation, but the words on the screen blurred. For once, spreadsheets and contracts couldn't hold her focus. She kept hearing Emma's soft voice. Why are you alone? The question echoed like a mirror she hadn't wanted to look into. She had money, power, and control, but none of that filled the silence when the meetings ended. Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar sound. Daddy, look. The plane is huge. Emma's excited voice floated down the aisle. Lara turned and saw Adrian carrying the small backpack and guiding his daughter with quiet patience. They were headed to the back of the plane, but Emma spotted Lara instantly. She wriggled free from her father's hand and hurried toward the front. Lara, you're here too. The flight attendant moved quickly, her professional smile firm. Sir, your seats are in the main cabin. You'll need to dash. Lara stopped her. It's all right, she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her tone. They're with me. Please, let them sit here. I hate flying alone. Adrian froze, clearly uncomfortable. We couldn't possibly. It's too much. Lara gave him a small, almost playful smile. I own the company that's paying for my ticket. If anyone asks, consider it a consultation fee. I wasn't joking about needing help with my apartment. Emma tugged on his sleeve, eyes bright with excitement. Please, Daddy, can we? I promise I'll be good. Adrian hesitated for another long second before finally nodding. All right. Thank you. That's very generous. They settled into the seats, Emma claiming the window while Adrian sat between them, clearly still unsure how to act in this new world of leather seats and quiet luxury. As the plane began to taxi, Emma pressed her nose against the glass, whispering about the tiny cars on the ground. Lara turned to Adrian, lowering her voice. So you really worked on accessibility before? He nodded. Yes. My neighbor back home used a wheelchair. I rebuilt parts of her house so she could live comfortably. Most contractors design for code, not for people. There's a difference. Lara's interest sharpened. Tell me, she urged. And for the next 20 minutes, Adrian spoke about kitchens that adjusted to different heights, shelves that could be pulled down without strain, and doorways wide enough to move without bruises. Lara listened, fascinated, realizing he spoke with the kind of insight she'd been searching for but could never buy. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Drinks were served, and Emma solemnly chose apple juice, while Adrian and Lara both asked for coffee. The girl's chatter soon quieted as her eyelids grew heavy. Before long, she was asleep against her father's arm, her tiny hand still gripping the straw of her cup. Lara watched them in silence, struck by the simplicity of it, the way Adrian stroked his daughter's hair, the way the little girl trusted the world because she trusted him. Something stirred in Lara, something she couldn't quite name. For the first time in years, she felt a pull that wasn't about business or ambition, but about wanting to belong. And she knew, deep down, this flight would not end the way she had imagined. The plane touched down with a soft bump, and Emma stirred awake immediately, rubbing her eyes. "Are we here? Are we in the new city?" she asked, pressing her face against the window again. Adrian stretched his shoulders and gave her a tired smile. "Yes, sweetheart. We're here." Passengers shuffled impatiently through the narrow aisle, but Lara found herself in no hurry. For 3 hours, she had shared something rare, authentic conversation without hidden agendas. As the cabin doors opened, she almost wished the flight could last a little longer. By the time they reached the gate, Emma was wide awake again, bouncing with excitement. "Daddy, look! Grandma!" she squealed, breaking free from Adrian's hand and running toward a short, silver-haired woman waiting near the exit. The woman bent down, gathering the child into her arms with a laugh that filled the entire terminal. Then she pulled Adrian into a fierce embrace. "My boy, you look too thin," she scolded affectionately. Lara stayed back, watching the scene unfold. The warmth of it, the effortless closeness, felt like something she hadn't experienced in years. She adjusted her bag on her lap, preparing to slip away unnoticed, when Adrian called out to her. "Lara, wait, this is my mother-in-law, Ingrid Schneider." "Mom, this is Lara Fisher. She sat with us on the flight." Ingrid turned immediately, her smile bright and unreserved. She stepped right up to Lara's wheelchair, taking her hand firmly. "Any friend of Adrian and Emma is a friend of mine. Do you have plans for dinner tomorrow?" Lara blinked, caught off guard. I have a hotel reservation downtown," she started to explain, but Ingrid waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. You'll come to our house. 7 o'clock. I'll cook. You need a proper meal, not hotel food." Emma tugged on Lara's sleeve with wide eyes. "Grandma makes the best food ever. You have to come." Against her usual instincts, Lara heard herself say softly, "I'd love to." That night, in the quiet of her hotel suite, Lara sat by the window overlooking the city lights. Her laptop was open, filled with charts and deadlines for the biggest meeting of her career. Tomorrow she would stand before investors and board members to secure a contract worth millions. It was the kind of moment she had lived for since she was a teenager, the kind of deal that would make headlines. But as she scrolled through the numbers, she couldn't stop thinking about Emma's little hand resting on hers, or Ingrid's invitation spoken with such unquestioning warmth. It unsettled her how much she wanted to be at that dinner, more than in any boardroom. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a simple message from an unknown number, but she knew who it was from. "Emma is already planning tomorrow's menu. She says you have to try at least 3 cookies, or she'll be disappointed. Adrian." Lara stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "Tell her I'll keep my promise." For the first time in years, she closed her laptop early and allowed herself to sit in the silence, not the hollow kind she was used to, but a silence that felt strangely full, as if something new was beginning to take shape. The next evening, Lara found herself outside a modest 2-story house with a small ramp built over the front steps. She noticed immediately that it wasn't standard construction. It had Adrian's touch, careful and practical. When the door opened, Emma came running out in a flower-stained apron 2 sizes too big. "Lara, you came," she shouted, throwing her arms around her as if they had known each other forever. Adrian appeared behind her, smiling, though his eyes showed a trace of nervousness. "Welcome to chaos," he said lightly. "Mom's been cooking all day, and Emma has been talking about nothing but you." Inside, the warmth was immediate. Boxes were stacked in corners, proof that the family had only just moved, but the walls already held framed photos of Emma with a woman whose smile mirrored her own. Lara paused, understanding without needing to ask. Adrian's voice softened behind her. "That's Maria, Emma's mother." Emma looked up at Lara and said proudly, "Daddy says she would have liked you." For a moment, Lara couldn't speak. She nodded gently. "She looks like someone everyone would have liked." Ingrid bustled into the room, wiping her hands on a towel. "Enough standing in the hallway. Sit down, sit down. The food is ready." The table was covered with steaming plates, enchiladas, rice, tortillas, guacamole. The kind of food that told stories of tradition and family. Lara wheeled into place, and Ingrid adjusted a chair without hesitation, making room as though this was routine, as though Lara had always belonged there. They said a short blessing, and then the conversation flowed as easily as the food disappeared. Emma spoke about starting school, her voice full of excitement. Adrian shared his plans to renovate the old house they'd just bought, explaining how he wanted to make it not only beautiful, but also accessible. Lara listened intently, realizing that for the first time in years, she was sitting at a table where nothing was expected of her except to be present. Halfway through the meal, Ingrid turned to Lara with her usual directness. "So, how was your big meeting today?" Lara set down her fork, suddenly aware that she hadn't even mentioned it. "It went well," she said carefully. "Very well, actually. We secured the largest contract in my company's history." Emma gasped. "That means you won, right?" Lara laughed. "Yes, I suppose it does." Ingrid tilted her head. "And how did you celebrate?" Lara hesitated. "We had champagne in the conference room. Made some calls." Ingrid clicked her tongue. "That's not celebrating." "This," she said, gesturing around the table, "this is celebrating. Food, laughter, people who care. Remember that." Lara felt something twist inside her, a quiet ache she hadn't known she carried. After dinner, Adrian walked her to the car while Emma and Ingrid cleared the table. The night air was cool, and the street was quiet. Lara stopped at the curb and looked at him seriously. "Thank you for tonight. I don't remember the last time I felt normal." Adrian smiled, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Normal's underrated. Sometimes it's the best thing we can hope for." There was a pause, heavier than either of them expected. "I meant what I said," Lara added softly. "About my apartment. I really do need someone who understands what accessibility actually means. Would you consider taking a look? As a professional?" Adrian studied her face, reading the unspoken layers beneath the question. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'd be honored." When Adrian arrived at Lara's apartment that weekend, he paused just inside the door, clearly taking in the polished marble floors, the high ceilings, the wide windows that spilled light across every corner. "Emma wasn't kidding," he said with a half-smile. "This really is like a tower." Lara laughed lightly but felt a trace of shame as she wheeled forward. "It looks impressive," she admitted, "but it's far from practical." Together, they moved from room to room, and Adrian's sharp eyes caught details she had long stopped noticing. The counters in the kitchen towered over her, the bathroom was poorly designed, and even the closet posed daily frustrations. Instead of just pointing out the problems, Adrian offered solutions: adjustable counters, wider passageways, storage that moved instead of forcing her to reach. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful that her home could finally feel like a place built for her, not against her. They spent hours sketching ideas at her dining table, eating takeout in between discussions about measurements and possibilities. As the night deepened, their conversation drifted from renovations to life itself. Lara shared how her parents supported her achievements publicly but kept her at a distance privately, afraid of what her disability represented in their carefully curated world. Adrian spoke about losing Maria, about the nights Emma cried herself to sleep, and how he had to learn to be both mother and father at once. By the time the empty cartons were pushed aside, Lara realized she hadn't spoken this honestly with anyone in years. For once, she wasn't the CEO making deals, she was just a woman, sitting across from a man who listened. Later, they stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched out below them in a sea of lights. Adrian leaned against the railing, holding a rough sketch of a new kitchen design. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes I think people forget what a home is supposed to be. It's not about how it looks in photos, it's about whether you can breathe inside it." Lara looked at him, her chest tight with emotions she didn't usually let surface. "Adrian, I don't just want you to fix this apartment," she said softly. "I want you to help me build something bigger. A whole division in my company, focused on real accessibility. I want you to lead it." His eyes widened, and for a long moment he didn't answer. Finally, he smiled faintly. "That sounds like more than just a job offer." Lara's voice shook slightly. "It is." The weeks that followed were a blur of board meetings and planning sessions, but this time, Lara wasn't fighting alone. Adrian's designs were bold yet practical, and clients responded with surprising enthusiasm. The division grew quickly, and for the first time, Lara's vision wasn't just about numbers, it was about people. Emma became a regular visitor at Lara's apartment, turning the once quiet penthouse into a home filled with laughter, spilled juice, and toy animals left on the living room floor. Ingrid dropped by often too, insisting on cooking meals big enough for an army. Slowly, without Lara even realizing it, her world began to change. The silence she had once drowned in was replaced by noise, the kind of noise that made life feel full. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Lara sat on the same balcony with Adrian and Emma. The little girl was busy drawing a princess tower with ramps and colorful gardens, her small hands smudged with crayons. Adrian looked at Lara and said, almost shyly, 3 months ago, we were strangers in an airport. Now it feels like we've known you forever." Lara smiled, her throat tight. "That's because I think I was waiting for you. Both of you." Emma looked up from her drawing, grinning. "So you're not alone anymore?" Lara reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "No, sweetheart, not anymore." And in that moment, surrounded by the family she never expected to find, Lara finally understood that success wasn't about towers or contracts, it was about love, connection, and never having to sit alone again.